These books weren't written to entertain you. They were written because silence became unbearable. Not story evidence, not fiction confessions. The darkest truths in history, written in ink so we'd never forget. Night, Elie Wiesel. To forget the dead would be akin to killing them a second time. Elie Wiesel's Night is not just a memoirs, a quiet scream etched onto paper. Written by a Holocaust survivor, the book recounts his teenage years spent in Auschwitz, where he witnessed the murder of his family, the collapse of his faith, and the slow erasure of his humanity. This isn't just a story of physical survival, it's the story of spiritual death. Wiesel begins as a deeply religious boy, but as the horrors unfold, babies thrown into fire, sons abandoning fathers, God's seemingly silent belief unravels. Faith becomes impossible when morality is no longer real. In the camps, survival replaces conscience, and decency becomes dangerous. Hunger, fear, and cruelty dismantle the self until nothing remains but instinct. What makes Night unforgettable is its restraint. It doesn't dramatize. It simply remembers calmly, precisely, unbearably. Wiesel doesn't ask for sympathy, he asks for memory. Because what was lost wasn't just lives, it was meaning, trust, and hope itself. Wiesel doesn't just describe horror, he whispers it so it stays with you, long after the final page. The Gulag Archipelago, Alexander Solzhenitsyn. You only have power over people as long as you don't take everything away from them. Alexander Solzhenitsyn's The Gulag Archipelago is not just a book, it's an indictment. It exposes a vast network of Soviet labor camps where millions were imprisoned, tortured, and forgotten. Written by a man who lived through it, this work blends personal testimony with historical documentation, revealing a system built not on justice, but on fear, lies, and dehumanization. At its core, the book dismantles the illusion of state benevolence. The people arrested weren't criminals. They were teachers, workers, priests, and even loyal communists. Anyone who could be labeled a threat. Guilt was irrelevant. Accusation was enough. Once inside the Gulag system, survival hinged on silence, submission, and luck. Torture wasn't the exception, it was the method. Confessions were extracted, families destroyed, and lives erased by bureaucratic cruelty. What's most disturbing is how ordinary people enabled the system. Guards, officers, and neighbors all played a role not out of hatred, but out of obedience, fear, or indifference. The real horror, Solzhenitsyn suggests, isn't the violence itself, but how easily society accepted it. This isn't a story of rebellion or escape. It's a chronicle of slow, systematic soul-breaking. It forces the reader to ask, how far can a government go before people stop being people? This book wasn't just banned, it was feared, because it told the truth. If this is a man, Primo Levi. It happened, therefore it can happen again. Primo Levi's If This Is a Man is a clinical, devastating account of his time as a prisoner in Auschwitz. But unlike many Holocaust memoirs, Levi doesn't focus on emotional language or dramatic scenes. Instead, he approaches his suffering like a scientist, observing, analyzing, and dissecting what happens to human beings when they are reduced to numbers. The book details life in the camp with chilling precision, the bitter cold, the endless hunger, the psychological degradation. In Levi's world, survival doesn't come to the strongest or the smartest, it comes to the luckiest. Morality is eroded slowly, not by choice, but by necessity. When food becomes currency, dignity becomes expendable. What makes this book truly disturbing is not its violence, but its clarity. Levi doesn't scream, he explains. And somehow, that's worse. He shows how the camp wasn't just designed to kill people, but to deconstruct them physically, emotionally, and ethically. The title is not rhetorical. It's a question. After Auschwitz, can we still call ourselves human? And if we forget what happened there, can we still call ourselves civilized? Levi doesn't just document suffering. He holds a mirror to our potential for indifference. Discipline and punish. Michel Foucault. Is it surprising that prisons resemble factories, schools, barracks, hospitals, which all resemble prisons? Michel Foucault's Discipline and Punish isn't a traditional history book. It's a disturbing exploration of how power works quietly, invisibly, and absolutely. It begins with the public torture of a man in 1757 and ends by showing how modern institutions no longer need chains or whips to control people. Today, surveillance, routine, and conformity do the job just as effectively. Foucault argues that society has traded cruelty for control. Instead of brutal punishments, we now shape people from the inside out through schools, prisons, military service, and even hospitals. These systems don't just manage behavior, they condition obedience. They turn human beings into subjects who monitor themselves. The most haunting idea in the book is the panopticon, a prison designed so that inmates never know when they're being watched. Eventually, they begin to behave as if they're always being watched. That's not fiction. That's modern life. Cameras in public spaces, data tracking, behavioral scoring, control without confrontation. Foucault doesn't write horror, but what he reveals is horrifying. That power no longer needs violence, it only needs normalization. And most terrifying of all, we've accepted it. Foucault didn't write a horror story, he diagnosed one. The rape of Nanking, Iris Chang. A single death is a tragedy, a million is a statistic. But what if every one of them was described in detail? Iris Chang's The Rape of Nanking is one of the most harrowing historical accounts ever written. It documents the 6-week massacre that followed the Japanese invasion of the Chinese city of Nanking in 1937, a period during which hundreds of thousands of civilians were raped, tortured, and murdered. Yet, outside of China, this atrocity is barely remembered. Chang's mission was to change that. What makes this book unbearable but necessary is its unflinching detail. Women, children, the elderly, no one was spared. Mass executions. Sexual violence on an industrial scale. Victims mutilated for sport. Chang doesn't dramatize these horrors, she exposes them, using survivor testimonies and forgotten records to bring the genocide back into public consciousness. Beyond the violence itself, the book explores another darkness: denial. For decades, the events in Nanking were downplayed or outright erased. Chang confronts this silence directly, showing how forgetting is a second form of violence, refusal to acknowledge pain that was real, widespread, and deliberate. This isn't just a history of war crimes, it's a challenge to memory and a demand for accountability. And for Iris Chang, the emotional toll of writing it was so great, she eventually took her own life. That fact alone speaks volumes. This book was so disturbing, it broke its author. But in telling the truth, she gave the victims their voices back. Ordinary Men. Christopher R. Browning. How did normal men, fathers, and neighbors become mass murderers overnight? Christopher Browning's Ordinary Men dismantles one of the most comforting myths about evil, that it's committed by monsters. Instead, this chilling account reveals how everyday people, given the right conditions, can become executioners. The book follows Reserve Police Battalion 101, a group of middle-aged German men with no prior military training, who were ordered to round up and kill thousands of Jews in Poland during World War II. These men weren't sadists or fanatics. They were working class, married, with children. They had a choice. And yet, most of them participated willingly in mass shootings, deportations, and acts of unimaginable cruelty. Why? Not out of hate, but out of peer pressure, obedience, and the slow erosion of moral boundaries. Browning meticulously reconstructs how systematic violence doesn't begin with bloodshed. It begins with orders, with small tasks that build into greater ones, with a culture that normalizes cruelty one step at a time. What's most horrifying is how easily these men rationalize their actions and how quickly they adjusted to killing. This book doesn't shock with gore, it shocks with reality. It forces us to confront the terrifying possibility that under different circumstances, we might not be any different. Evil doesn't always come with a snarl. Sometimes, it just follows orders and smiles while doing it. We wish to inform you that tomorrow we will be killed with our families. Philip Gurevich. It happened not because of ancient hatred, but because no one stopped it. Philip Gorevich's hauntingly titled book isn't just a report on the 1994 Rwandan genocide. It's an intimate confrontation with humanity's worst failure, indifference. Over the course of 100 days, nearly 1 million people, mostly Tutsi civilians, were slaughtered with machetes by their neighbors, friends, and local officials. It was one of the fastest and most brutal genocides in history, and the world did nothing. Gurevich travels through post-genocide Rwanda, listening to survivors, interviewing perpetrators, and documenting a country still breathing under the weight of trauma. What emerges is a picture not just of violence, but of abandonment. The international community knew what was happening. There were warnings, reports, even eyewitnesses. Yet no real intervention came. What could have been stopped was allowed to unfold in silence. This book isn't written to shock, it's written to expose the cost of apathy. Gurevich doesn't sensationalize the killings. Instead, he reveals the devastating consequences of moral paralysis. How bureaucracy, political hesitation, and global indifference can be deadlier than any weapon. More than a chronicle of genocide, this is a story about memory, justice, and the failure to act when it matters most. Its quiet rage is unmistakable. They knew they would die, but they still hoped someone might care, and no one did. Man's Search for Meaning, Viktor E. Frankl. Those who have a why to live can bear almost any how. Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning is not just a survival memoir, it's a philosophical blueprint written in the shadow of death. As a psychiatrist and Holocaust survivor, Frankl documents his years inside Nazi concentration camps, not merely to recount the horror, but to understand the psychology of suffering. What he finds is both devastating and strangely life-affirming. In the face of starvation, brutality, and endless loss, Frankl observed a fundamental truth. The people who endured were not the strongest, but those who found meaning. Not in the suffering itself, but in something beyond a reason to live, even when living seemed impossible. Some clung to love, others to faith, many to unfinished responsibilities. What mattered wasn't hope in the abstract, but a concrete why. What makes this book extraordinary is how it combines raw testimony with deep insight. Frankl doesn't dwell on violence. Instead, he reveals how quickly dignity can be taken and how powerful it is when reclaimed. Even in the camps, prisoners could choose their response. That choice, he argues, is what makes us human. Man's Search for Meaning is a book born from despair, but it refuses to be defeated by it. Instead, it offers something rare: purpose. Frankl shows us that even in the darkest places imaginable, meaning is not something we find, it's something we choose. Thank you so much for watching this video. And if gained some knowledge, then please hit the like button and subscribe to our channel for more future content. Until then, goodbye.